So the wonderful thing about Poussin working in this way with these models is that it reminds me of an analog version of what we do today on computer. So you can bring all these various components together and various different players and different models can come together as a composition. And then you can start to move the composition around or flip it from left to right, see it in reverse, and when you're done with it, store it.
In the Adoration of the Golden Calf, I could almost read it as a storyboard. It's almost giving instructions of how you would shoot it if you were to shoot it as a cinematic work. You know, from the cinematography of how you light it, it also almost gives you movement of what we need the audience to see first in terms of the action, and then where we might either change frame or rack focus or have a camera movement that might kind of start in the corner towards Moses and then kind of pan out and sort of see the wider scene. The kind of films that I'm interested in making recently are quite Hollywood-like, high production value. And so in that kind of film, you often have a camera on a Steadicam or an arm which moves smoothly around a scene and sort of takes everything in to make it feel big, to make it feel epic. And I think, you know, for me, this is what's happening in this painting in a different way. Through the way the lighting is, through the way that the people are configured and the choreography, it feels like movement.
In the 20th century, it was discovered that if you use infrared technology, so wavelengths of light slightly longer than normal light, can see through the paint and magically reveal the drawings that are underneath. This kind of drawing we refer to as underdrawing. It's never supposed to be seen in the final version of the painting. It will always be covered by paint. But with this technology, we can see through the paint and see whether there is an underdrawing there, and if there is, what it can tell us about how the artist was working.
I could bore you stiff with endless mundane charities like planning permission. Where might the cake go? And it was tempting to try to get it put up in the park outside the dairy. But we were concerned that the planners might have doubts about that, and my own feeling was there was a much better half-hidden sight, more surprising when you came across this extraordinary work of art, than if it had been out in the open. It'll be made more magical by the trees around it, which will hide it, disguise it for many months of the year. It's a kind of almost natural extension, another surprise at once in the fourth chapter, if you like.
This is a frame that we recently bought. It's a Spanish early 17th century frame, a so-called Herrera frame. Very idiosyncratic, like many Spanish frames are. Much of it has got original surface. Quite a lot of the gilding is very beautifully preserved. But at some point, other parts of it must have been damaged and were repaired quite badly, or repaired with the wrong sensitivity. For instance, you can see here that those two are the original Spanish 17th century jewel-like shapes, very hard and sharp and actually quite flat. And then in the 20th century, they applied these slightly too tall, slightly too fat, and slightly too bulbous-looking repairs. And actually, there are a lot on this length. Luckily, they're a little bit too big. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to carve them smaller rather than to knock them off and put other repairs on. But then they're sound in many other ways, and taking them off and gluing other pieces on might damage some more of the original substance, whereas just recarving these existing repairs is probably a gentler way of making it look right.
For this episode on the martyrdom of John the Baptist, I thought we had to come here to Malta, to the oratory of the Knights of Malta, to look at Caravaggio's extraordinary, over life-size representation of the beheading of the Baptist, which he painted in 1608, came to Malta, came under the protection of the Knights, and it was actually made a Knight of the Order himself. And the subject of John the Baptist is obviously one that's particularly appropriate because John is a patron saint of the Knights of Malta. The Knights were traditionally always associated with the sacred holy places where John preached, where he was buried, and so forth.
It's a building, but then it's a wedding cake, then it's a temple inside, then it's a sculpture that you can visit. You can not only get inside, but you can get to the top of it. But only 2 people can get to the top and become the 2 figures on the top, the groom and bride. I'm asking people to finish what I started, because unless somebody goes to the top, the piece is not finished. And unless somebody dares to be in the top, the piece is not ready. So I have to ask people to go to the top and to be part of the experience and to finish my work. So in a way, I'm asking the collaboration of everybody to make it happen.
The ingredients were ground and mixed together using a stone muller. Once dried, a pointed metal stylus would leave a mark when drawn across the paper. Metal point and silver point marks are quite faint. An opaque white paint, known as body colour, could add highlights. A different drawing technique used pens made from goose feathers. To make a quill to draw with, first they were hardened in heated sand, before being cut by hand. Ink made from materials such as oak galls, ground and mixed with iron sulfate, produced a rich black medium that often faded to sepia brown over time. Quill pen and ink allowed artists greater freedom to make marks that could include sweeps of the pen and fine contour hatching.
But actually, I think that probably the best example is that he starts making these wax figurines. So it's almost as if he's giving himself this intermediary step where he can model figures out of wax, and he can, they're only the size of his palm. He can adjust their poses. He can rotate them. He can draw them from every angle, and then he can move that towards a painting. But it's as if the painting, we only get to the 2-dimensional painting having had this 2- and 3-dimensional exploration beforehand.
A man in a red doublet kneels on a sheaf as he binds it. A woman bends almost double to bring another bundle together. Her forehead rests on the wheat, her arms stretched to surround it.
If you are working and you are in the moment, you do not think of time and space anymore. And you can imagine a dancer from a very top ballet or dance group performing like this, so fluently that you think it must be easy. And that's a very idyllic view on the bucolic and on the traditional rural life too.
Follow the path down the hill, past the man bringing more beer to the workers. Do you see the 3 women? The first 2 carry sheaves of wheat. The third is empty-handed. Her face is in profile.
I feel like you can tell that she's thinking about something. She's looking down, but you get a sense that she's a real person. And it's almost like a little mini portrait in the center of the painting, and you wouldn't necessarily notice her. When you stand in front of the painting at the Met, there's no way you could get this close. I mean, the guards will yell at you if anywhere near that close.
Follow the slope of the wheat field down to the bottom of the valley. There's a tiny pond in the cool green shade of the trees. Not everyone's working today.
Making colour is about how painters transform pigments into dazzling works of art. It's about the origins of colours and about the science of how we identify and understand them. Over the centuries, some colours have been tricky, badly behaved, even elusive. And new pigments have brought new artistic possibilities. The results are luminous, fiery, and simply breathtaking.
The Pre-Raphaelites were fascinated by the convex mirror at the heart of the Arnolfini portrait. They were interested in it as an object in its own right, and indeed similar mirrors appear in several of their paintings. But it also stood as a metaphor for their own artistic practice, in that they were trying to capture a truth which went beyond truth to external appearances. They wanted to convey a deeper psychological, spiritual realism or truth.
Mary Hunter had rented this Gothic palazzo on the Grand Canal, Palazzo Barbaro. It was owned by Ariana and Daniel Curtis, and it was already at the heart of the American artistic community here. It had been immortalised in Sargent's portrait of the Curtises and in Henry James's novel The Wings of the Dove. Typically, Monet wasn't affected by this social milieu or by the whole history of artists who had painted the city before him. But strangely, for an artist who'd been painting across water his whole life, here in Venice he didn't start to paint for a week. He told his wife it was too beautiful to be painted. However, it seems that the city's autumnal light, which Monet called a unique light, drew him in.
Pigments made from mineral clays, known as green earths, bound in egg tempera, were used by Italian artists from the 13th to 15th centuries as a base colour for flesh. These greens were used to suggest shadows and model the shape of the face. Pinks, reds and white highlights were added on top. Tempera dries so quickly that different colours can't easily be blended on the painting surface, so artists used delicate hatching when applying the different colours. The very green skin tone of many Renaissance faces may be due to the layers of pink paint having faded, revealing more of the base layer than was intended.